Can you trust Keir Starmer? Labour have pledged to create temporary so-called Nightingale courts to speed up asylum decisions, and the party is also pledging to hire over 1,000 Home Office caseworkers to clear the asylum backlog and fast-track decisions for applicants from certain countries. So they plan to stop using hotels, barges and former military sites to house asylum seekers, which they claim costs the taxpayers over £2 billion a year. But where do they plan to house these people then? If not in hotels, barges and former military sites, if they do have a plan, they certainly haven't said it. Commons Labour leader Penny Mordaunt doesn't seem to think Starmer's plans are very strong. Have a listen.
Because I think the Labour leader is Beach Ken. Beach Ken stands for nothing on shifting sands, in his flip-flops, staring out to sea, doing nothing constructive to stop small boats or grow the economy. And when we examine his weak record on union demands, on border control, on protecting the public and stopping small boats, we discover that, like Beach Ken, he has zero balls.
Sorry, this follows yet another U-turn by Keir Starmer. Despite originally endorsing plans to give EU nationals full voting rights, those plans did not make their way into Labour's National Policy Forum document. It's certainly not the only screeching U-turn Keir Starmer has made as Labour leader. He rode back on plans to scrap universal credit, backflipped on his pledge to abolish tuition fees and abandoned his £28 billion green prosperity plan. So, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, can you trust Keir Starmer? Well, I'm joined now by Dennis MacShane. He's a former Labour MP and Minister for Europe. Suzanne Evans, political commentator. David Kurten, leader of the Heritage Party. And Anne Widdecombe, former Conservative Minister. I'm going to start with you, Dennis MacShane. Dennis?
My answer, can one trust? I'm so sorry. I'm falling off the seat by listening to Penny Mordaunt saying that Keir Starmer's got no. But what were we allowed to use this language on GBNews?
Of course we can. She said it. It's fine.
Well, I'm sorry. Hitler has got, Goebbels has too, but very. I think this is disgusting, horrible, typical of the state of the Conservative government now, that they use language like that.
OK, no, but let's
on Starmer, all right, here's very simply, my answer is, I think you should trust anybody elected to high office. I don't know, because Starmer isn't Prime Minister. What I can say is we've seen the record of Liz, of Boris, of Rishi, of Theresa, of David.
Yeah, but specifically,
and at the moment,
Starmer, we're focusing on him.
At the moment, I see no evidence. You're talking about, I didn't even know about giving votes, and I'm a real European expert. I mean, you're inventing things and saying they're being turned around and dropped off.
But they have been.
The National Policy Forum is where Labour sorts out a lot of its difficulties. These are debates, they're not decisions, Nana. And yes, for the time being, we'll see if I prove wrong when he becomes Prime Minister, and you'll be jumping down my throat or jumping up and down with joy. I actually think Keir Starmer exudes someone who's fairly straight, a very boring, effective lawyer, holding high legal positions, not made many mistakes in his life, other than perhaps getting involved in politics. And yes, I think the country senses this is a man you can trust after the liars that we've had in the last 3 years.
Anne Widdecombe.
Yeah, well, that is just hilarious, Dennis. I mean, the idea that you trust somebody who changes his mind every 2 minutes on something or other. I mean, Nana only listed a fraction of the things that he's changed his mind on. Now, when somebody issues a great high statement of principle and says, this is what we are going to do, and then 5 minutes later actually decides this is what we are not going to do, you cannot trust that man. That doesn't mean he's a bad man. It just means he's completely ineffectual and can't stick to a route. And so, of course, you can't trust him. And the idea that Keir Starmer is worthy of being Prime Minister. I mean, I've got my views on Rishi Sunak as well. But the idea that Keir Starmer can go into number 10 and can be relied upon to set out a programme and stick to it is just a joke. Come back, Margaret Thatcher, please.
Suzanne Evans. Suzanne.
So I think both Anne and Dennis are right. I just had a quick look at the GBNews Twitter poll. 87% of people are now saying that they don't trust Starmer. But of course, we don't know how many of that 87% don't trust Rishi Sunak either. And if a poll of about a month ago is to be believed, 2/3 of voters don't trust either of them. They're totally disillusioned with both of them. Now, interestingly, that same poll showed that people trusted Keir Starmer more than Rishi Sunak on 4 of Rishi Sunak's top 5 priorities, the ones to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce the national debt and cut NHS waiting lists. But interestingly, Rishi Sunak only came out top on the Stop the Boats policy, although that could have changed because, of course, there have been about another 7,500 illegal migrants come across by the boats by then. But here's the nub. Only a maximum of 37% trusted either of them on anything. And I think this is the problem, really. Politicians have never been top of the trustworthy list, but now I think they're at an all-time rock bottom low. Nothing in the country seems to be working for anybody, and nobody trusts either of them.
Well, let's go over to David Kurten. What do you make of all that, Crumbs?
Yeah, well, I don't trust anyone who can't define a woman straight off the bat, like Keir Starmer. I mean, it's taken a long time to get there. But, anyone who doesn't say a woman is defined by their anatomy and their chromosomes, really, they're not talking any common sense whatsoever. But on all the other things as well that you've mentioned, that sort of policy areas that he's done flip-flops on, he's done them because he thinks, oh, well, this is the popular position in the country. I've got to sell this to the public and say, oh, yeah, well, I support some kind of more populist position. But remember, Labour and the Conservatives too will do a bait and switch before elections. They will say things to get elected. As soon as they will revert straight back to Labour's core policies, which will be more mass immigration, more tax, higher spending, higher borrowing, and that's what we're going to get. And, the Conservatives have done that in the last 13 years. Blair Brown did that in the 13 years before that. And if Starmer gets in, he's going to continue with that, and he will be a disaster.
And do you think he'll be a disaster, Starmer?
I think either of those two are disasters, quite honestly, which is why I think that if people really had enough, then this is the moment when, given that you can hardly put a paper between Rishi and Keir Starmer, this is the moment to make a real change and vote for another party altogether. And I'm not talking about the Lib Dems.
No. So, Dennis, you're laughing.
It's the usual 3 against 1, and I love it. 4 against 1. Of course, Nana, Queen Nana. You're going to bash me over the head with your handbag like that poor man, that man whose shop was being shoplifted. I just think...
We can't say that she was being shoplifted.
All right, not yet. No, OK. I think that the people... remotely interested in Brexit parties, reform parties, or off the cuff invented tomorrow parties. So they're not. Anne knows this. She's actually stood and fought in real live parliamentary elections. They're not going to move away from the 2 big parties to choose the next Prime Minister and government.
Well, you never know, Dennis. Maybe.
Well, perhaps if we were Italy, yes. Well, we are becoming more like Italy.
Well,
Daily Telegraph compared us to Argentina last week. The economy is so bad. So my answer
I think what Dennis said would be true if people were worried by either of the big parties. When they were worried about Corbyn, no way were they going to vote for the Brexit party because they were terrified that would let Corbyn in. This time, they're not so worried. And this is the time, as I say, if you've really had enough, look at Reform UK, look at actually doing something different with your vote, because next time it may be worrying again. We may have Corbyn back.
All right, so this will be yes or no. Dennis MacShane, can you trust Keir Starmer? Yes. Suzanne Evans, can you trust Keir Starmer?
Can't trust any of them, I'm afraid, at the moment.
No. Anne Widdecombe, yes or no?
I don't trust any of them.
None of them. And David? Yes or no?
No, definitely not.
None of them. Well, listen, thank you so much for your thoughts. Dennis MacShane, former Labour MP and Minister for Europe. Suzanne Evans, political commentator. David Kurten, leader of the Heritage Party. And Anne Widdecombe, former Conservative Minister.